Hey everyone, it's me, Kirk Mastin, here at Mastin Labs, and today we're going to be editing with all the presets in Capture One. So hold on to your seats, it's going to be really fun. And if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. Before we get started, I'm going to just go over the Mastin three-step workflow. This is really a critical part of what we do. We do like over 80 adjustments per film look so that you don't have to. And all you really need to do is just apply the preset, adjust the exposure, usually up a little bit, adjust white balance and tint to taste. And you're looking to get good skin tones if possible. That's your goal with that. And I'll go through all that in this edit. Let's just jump in right now and get started. So got this really cool image by Nordica, and I'm assuming it was shot in Iceland. It looks very Icelandic. And we're going to start here. One thing to consider when you are deciding what film look to use is what are you trying to say in your photo? Like what is the vibe of the photo? Is it a dark and moody photo by nature, or a light and airy photo by its very nature, or something in between? And that is what I think about when I start editing, unless I've built my style around one pack in particular. But for this pack, seeing that it's in Iceland and we've got these cool horses and there's kind of a dynamic lighting pattern, I'm going to go for a moodier look rather than a light and airy look. And I will do that later on some of the other images, such as this, where it is inherently a light and airy photo. But on this, it is inherently a dark and moody photo. So that's where we're going to start. So within the Mastin Labs packs for Capture One, this image would do really well with either something from the Fujicolor Everyday pack or the Portrait Original pack. And I'm going to start with Portrait Original and just go through my three-step edit and show you how it works. So I'm going to apply the film look, and in just that one click, you have, actually looks really fantastic. It's already a really nice image. It helps that it was shot very well. Just like any photo, the quality that you start with really has an impact on the final quality after you edit. And Nordica did a great job with this image. It's very well exposed, not over, not under. Cool dynamic lighting. I love the wind, and the GFX is not a shabby camera, so by any means. So this looks really good. So that's the first step, Portrait 400. The next step is exposure. Exposure looks pretty good. I would maybe actually go down in this case. I mean, just ever so slightly to protect the highlights on her forehead and on the front of her dress. And now I'm looking at the overall white balance of the photo and seeing where her skin tones fall. This image, if anything, I'm going to zoom in here just so you can see a little bit better. It looks like the skin tones are just about right. I would say that the front of her cheek here is a little bit green. So I'm going to just increase the tint slider towards magenta just the tiniest bit. So it's at negative 3.9. I'm going to go to like, maybe, let me see, negative 2. And just kind of roll that that green off of her face with a little magenta. So that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that looks really good. That's it. So easy. Isn't that easy? That is so easy. Look at that. Before and after. And thank you, Capture One, for adding this really awesome slider. I mean, this really kicks ass. You can really see how it changes. And what I want to point out here is just look at the micro contrast that you get with the presets and film styles that we make. Going from this raw image to this, where it looks natural, it looks like it has a really nice depth without looking like HDR, without it looking fake. And that is the beauty and timelessness of film that we love so much here at Mastin Labs, and what we work at so hard to give you as a digital photographer. So this slider is awesome. It just makes it easy to kind of show you that. I mean, look at like in the mountains back here too. It's great. Yes, I'm a micro contrast junkie, and that is something I love. So great image. Anything in the portrait pack fits it really well. Here's Portrait 160. It's kind of a slightly more muted, more brown, preset or film style in general. Portrait 400 is what we were on, which is one of my favorite kind of all-around neutral looks. It's really good for like lighter, whiter skin tones. It's got a lot of warmth in it, and that builds really nicely on super pale skin. So it's a good one kind of all around for her in particular. And then we've got Portrait 800, which is a slightly more saturated, more contrasty version of Portrait 400. So any of those are going to look good on this image. All right, let's move on down the line. Let's do the opposite. Okay, this is a light and airy photo. This is by Angie Peralta. Thank you for sending it to us. This is also from a Fuji camera. I believe this is a GFX as well. We have just kind of like a slew of GFX images in this batch, but we will get to other camera types too. But this image is set up to be a light and airy image. Why? You have nice backlit light here. So the light is behind her, creating kind of a rim of light across her shoulder and around the side. And what's really nice about backlit situations is that it puts the front of your subject in nice even shade created by their own body. It's kind of a weird concept to think about, but the sun is behind her, creating this really nice definition, this rim light, right? And yet, all of this, her face, the front of her body is in open shade. This is the shadow of her own body because the sun is behind her. It's kind of trippy, but it makes for really nice, smooth lighting, which lends itself to a light and airy style. So with that in mind, I'm going to go to Fuji Color Original, and I'm going to choose Fuji 400H Neutral. Fuji 400H is like the king of light and airy films, like an actual film stock. And it was one of my favorites to bring into Capture One. It's really good for wedding photography if you want that light and airy look. So here is Fuji 400H. The white balance and exposure need to be changed just a little bit, but those are steps 2 and 3. So I'm going to increase the exposure, again, to give that kind of light and airy look. I just went up just a little bit. And okay, this is a really interesting little tip here. So like I said before, she is standing in the shadow of her own body because the light is behind her, right? So the back of her body makes shadow for the front of her body. I know it's kind of crazy. Did you know that shadow light is cooler than sunlight? It has a different Kelvin rating, like a different Kelvin number. And so that is why it can be warm on this grassy field behind her, and yet she is too cool because she is in her own shadow. So I'm going to warm up her skin with the Kelvin slider, until that looks correct. I'm going to go a little bit warmer. That's too warm. Back it off a little bit. I'd say right about here. I'm looking for these highlights, these kind of subtle highlights on her face, to not be blue. So I might go up to like about here. Okay, second part of the temperature and tint combo is tint. And tint is the difference between magenta and green. Just looking at her globally, I'm going to say that she's a little bit magenta. If I just look at her all of her skin tone all the way through here, and you can especially see it right here on the shadowy side of her hand, on the side of her arm, like right in here. It's very magenta. Look at the detail. This is crazy. That's just insane. Sorry, I don't own a GFX, but man, every time I edit a photo with a GFX photo, I'm like, holy cow. So I'm going to increase the amount of green in the photo with the tint slider going to the left until her skin has the right skin tone. So I just moved it just a tiny bit. Tiny bit is a very not a distinct amount. It's kind of just by eye. That's too far. It's like, when you see it, that was too far. Right about, yeah, right about there. I think that's how Cartman would say here. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, and I'm going to go up in exposure just a tiny bit more. There we go, light and airy edit. Yes, I'm as slow as a turtle, but it was still very fast and only 3 steps. So here is before and after. And what I love is like, even though this image has a lot of diffraction in it, so the light is hitting the glass and the lens at kind of a weird angle, so it's taking away contrast in her hair. There's contrast here at the front of her hair, there's contrast at her eye here, but right about here you start to lose contrast because of that diffraction. You've got this little sunbeam thing here and on her head. Even with that, as soon as you apply Fuji 400H, it brings back that micro contrast that gives it a three-dimensional look without it looking really fake and weird. So it's really nice. And that is what I would use on an image like this. I would use Fuji 400H. The Fuji original pack is for a light and airy look, whereas the Portrait pack, which I used on the other image, is for a neutral or moody look. So, okay, let's move on down the line. I love this image. Okay, this is by Leonard Creary. I love this image so much. Great job. I love her posing. I love the bridge. I love everything about it. You're being very brave shooting in like full sun. A lot of people, well, especially like with this type of dress and everything, like you're using full sun really well. That's what I gotta say. For this image, I would either do probably Fuji 160 NS, which would accentuate a little bit of the blue in the sky, and it really is kind of a I don't know, it's a very interesting variation on Fuji 400H. So 160 NS is a little more saturated than 400H, and it really leans into blues and kind of pink magenta colors. There isn't much pink or magenta in this image, but there is a lot of blue, so I think it looks really cool. Cool as in neat, not as in cold. Anyway, so that's the first step. Second step is exposure. Looking at this image, it looks about right. Maybe I might actually drop the exposure just a tiny bit. And the last thing would be temperature and tint. So maybe warm it up a little bit. And with the tint slider, go a tiny bit towards magenta, just ever so slightly. One thing I wanted to point out is if you notice around the edges of the image, it gets quite a bit darker, like right along here along the trees and over here on the side. This is vignetting, and there's probably also distortion in here too, but this is vignetting from shooting wide open. If you look at the f-stop here in the histogram, it's at f1.8. So this lens was shot wide open, and when you shoot wide open, you introduce a lot of vignetting, which is like darkening in the corners. This happens because glass is curved. There's less glass in the corners. It catches less light, and it's darker when you use the entire part of your lens. So if you stop down and you're shooting at like f8, you're using just like this tiny little part in the middle of the lens, and it's very even across that little part, the thickness of the glass and the optical formula, and you don't have that darkening around the edges. With all that being said, to answer the question you didn't even ask, why am I pointing this out? Because we have a tool for that. There's a lens correction section down here at the bottom that if you use it, it will correct the lens and get rid of that vignetting and distortion. And on an image like this, if I don't want the edges to be darker, I would just apply that. And that really changes the, the look. There we go, now it's on. There we go. And it's quite a bit different of an image. In fact, there was so much vignetting around the edges that I could actually go up to exposure and bring exposure down again. That's how much was corrected out. And that's what I'm going to do, because I want more of a magazine look and have it be evenly lit. One thing that you really won't realize until you look for it is go to your local newsstand or bookstore and go to the fashion magazine area. Look at the covers and just kind of flip through, and you'll notice that almost no professional image has vignetting in it. There's a few reasons for that. One is that a lot of fashion photographers shoot at like f5.6 so that all the clothing is in focus. A lot of like wedding photographers and portrait photographers, They like a really shallow depth of field because it just feels cool. Or there's a lot of reasons, not just that it feels cool. That's really basic, but a lot of fashion photographers will shoot with a deeper depth of field, like 5.6, f8, something deeper, to get all the clothing and the environment in focus because it's all very deliberate. One side effect of that is that they never have any vignetting or distortion in their image. I like to get that look on a lot of my imagery, so that is why a long time ago I wanted to include lens correction tools in with every pack, and that is a use case where I would do it. So with this image, I think it just finishes it out really nicely to take away that distortion and vignetting. So here is before and after. And you can really see how Fuji 160 NS really changes the blues in the image. And that is just a thing that it does that I like. Some people go, well, that's not really the color of the sky anymore. Yes, I agree. And the green of the trees is no longer exactly what it looked like there either. But that is a signature feeling and look of a lot of different Fujifilm films. It was an aesthetic choice when the films were made. And if you like it, you love it. So that is what's going on. It's a really nice picture. Okay, let's move on, shall we? Let's do something inside. Actually, let me do something outside. I love this image. It's really cool. I love her freckles, her hair, and that she's at a tennis court, of all things. This is by Lori Lyman. This is shot on a Canon camera of some kind. Let me see here. 5D Mark III. Cool. So for this image, it could go two ways. I could see this image being really vibrant with something from Adventure Everyday Original, which is like your tropical, sunny, vibrant, colorful pack, or it could go more like moody. Either way, I see kind of two moods in this image. You're not starting at an extremely like light and airy point or dark and moody point. You're kind of in the middle, so you can kind of drag it either way. So I'll show you two edits, two different ways to do this. So let me start with the moody one. Let's do that. So in Portrait Original, I'm going to start with, let's do Portrait 160. And we've got some mood happening here. As far as exposure goes, we could even come down a little bit. And then with temperature and tint, I'm going to warm it up. So like right about here, and it's a little bit magenta, the entire image, so I'm going to go towards green, just a tiny bit. Not too much though. If I had to choose for skin tones being a little too magenta or too green, and hopefully neither, like you don't want either, but if I had to choose, I would always choose a little bit magenta, because green just seems kind of sickly and not good, unless you're a zombie or something, but even then it's not good. So there's a nice moody edit. That was just super, super duper easy. Not many people can say something is super duper easy, but I just did, because that's a cool, again, as in like really neat, easy and fast way to get a moodier edit. And if for fashion photographers out there, like that's just so quick. And then if you are into really retouching or doing your own thing in studio, this serves as a really nice starting point, a really nice base if you want to do further retouching, and starting with a base that isn't blocking anything up, that's simulating film and giving that same dynamic range, but the same amount of punch that film has, real film has. Real film has a black point. It really does. Real film, as long as you don't underexpose it, should not be faded in the blacks or have crushed highlights. Just want to dispel that myth right now. So that's one way of editing this photo. There we go. Look at that. We made a variant. And now I'm going to do a completely different edit. So we've got our dark and moody edit. I'm going to reset this. And now I'm going to show you like the other colorful edit I had in mind. So here's Ektar. Look at that. It is like such a different picture all of a sudden just with that choice. Ektar is the most colorful film in production right now. and that translates into the most colorful preset or film style that we make. I love it for so many things. I love color a lot. I am not, I don't know, I kind of vary between being a dark and moody photographer and a more colorful photographer, but I love Ektar, and you can see how it just energizes this photo. So that's Ektar. I'm actually going to increase the exposure a little bit, take this image in a different direction, and I'm going to warm it up. Her face is really too cool. Although it looks neat though, but I'm going to warm up just a little bit and add just a tiny bit of magenta. Right about there. So now we have a completely different look. It's really wild. I mean, so here's before and after. And that looks really good. And then, I mean, compare that to the dark and moody look. You have both. You can do either style with an image that starts, you know, very neutral like this one. So I think it looks really good. I don't know which one I like better. It really depends on what I'm trying to do. Now I kind of want to increase the exposure of this just a little bit. Okay, so if I had this one or this one, I don't know, it depends. If I was shooting more fashion editorial, I'd probably go with this style. And if I was shooting like, I don't know, like something for the Gap, you know, like happier lifestyle, I'd go with the more colorful edit. There you go. That is what I'm talking about. All right, let's go to this image by Tim Angle. I love this. Like you, Tim, you are brave doing such an interesting lighting pattern. Who would, I would never go to like photography school and they'd be like, light someone's mouth and like part of their eye, and that's the assignment. It would be like, oh, try to show their whole face and, you know, get light under the eyes and make, you know, perfect catch lights and key light and fill light. You just like did your own thing, and it's awesome. I love it. This kind of image feels moody. So I'm going to, but, you know, on the other hand, you know what? I'm going to try Fujicolor Every Day. See how that goes. So Fujicolor Every Day is a pack that we made with drugstore films in it, like Fujicolor C200 and Superior 400, and Acros, which is an amazing black and white film. Maybe I'll show Acros too. These are really good films for images that are either neutral to dark that you're starting out with. I think this could look really good. So let's do Superior 400. Going to increase the exposure just a little bit. That's too far. I like it being really dark. Right about here. Now I'm going to go to the temperature and tint. I'm going to cool it down just a little bit here. Well, it depends on what you're trying to say with the image. If you want it to feel cool, I guess you would just cool it down. I'm going to go neutral. And then I'm going to add just a tiny bit of green. Right about there. That is just a really subtle and interesting photo. It really like accentuates her lips. That is kind of the main focal point. And I'm very curious about this little tiny bit of catchlight here and a little bit of her eyelashes. That's really cool. I am very interested to see how this would look with Acros. So Acros is a black and white film that lives in the Fujicolor Everyday pack, and it's really good for like low-key black and white imagery, where you're trying to keep it low-key. So there's Acros 100. Increase the exposure just a little bit here. Yeah, that looks really cool too. And there's nothing to do with temperature or tint really, because it's black and white, obviously. And I'm gonna try some of these different tone profiles just to add just a little more detail in the image. So tone profile is a setting on the Fuji Frontier scanner, which is where all of our styles and presets are developed. It's a very special scanner. It's a very special look that a lot of people crave. It also includes these tone profiles in the scanner itself, this giant like desk size scanner. And the tone profiles are all hard, all soft, highlight hard, highlight soft, shadow hard, and shadow soft. And these tone profiles, they either bring out detail in the shadows or highlights or both, or they add contrast in the highlights or the shadows or both. And these tools exist to solve lighting issues. In this case, I'm going to use Shadow Soft to bring out just a little more detail in the shadow area of this image. So it's very subtle. You go from this to this, but it's just enough to bring out a little more detail along the side of her head and separate that out from the background, and to start increasing detail in this very shadowy area right above her lips. And that's where I'm going to leave it. So here is before and after, and here is the color version. They both look really, really cool. So thank you, Tim. I love this image. I think it's fantastic. Okay, let's go to Mexico. Okay, so this is from Marcos Valdez, fantastic photographer in Mexico. I love his work. And I love this image. I love the composition and the excitement in it. And you can see that he's shooting at a much deeper aperture than a lot of photographers would normally at a wedding. So he's shooting at f4.5, and I like that because you're getting detail from front to back. And that to me feels more, in many ways, more professional to be able to compose your picture and allow things to be in focus. So a lot of interest in this photo. For an image like this, where I'm building off of already warm tones, so there's a lot of like orange, brown, some red in this photo, I want to pair that with a style that complements it. Nothing in Fuji Original is going to complement it. Fuji Original is about cyan and lime green and blue and like light and airy. So nothing in there is appropriate, in my opinion, for this. Instead, I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use Portrait Original. So in Portrait Original, like I said earlier, you've got Portrait 160, which is very muted and brown, Portrait 400, which is kind of like right down the middle, really good base, and then Portrait 800, which is a more contrasty, saturated version of Portrait 400. I'm going to start with Portrait 400, and I think that's going to be the right one. So, or I'm going to roll back and forth. Let's see. It really depends. Ooh, that looks good too. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, Portrait 400, I think. Okay, Portrait 400. I liked all of them. It's really hard to decide. So, Portrait 400. I'm going to leave the exposure where it is. I'm going to cool it down just a little bit. While I'm cooling it down, sometimes people ask, like, what are you looking for white balance? How are you deciding? I look for neutrals. That really helps guide where I go with white balance. And I'm looking at his shoulder. If you get your neutrals, pretty dialed in, everything else kind of falls into place. And I'm going to be doing my color adjustments based on how his suit is looking, because I'm going to assume that it's a neutral color, like a charcoal gray. So I'm going to bring down temperature. There we go. And you can see it just like lock into place. Like it went from being like kind of a nebulous warm color to being distinctly charcoal colored and allowing the rest of the background to still remain warm. I've created, in a way, like a contrast of color, like where the colors get to be themselves by removing that global warm cast that was a little bit too much. And if I back out, I can show you the difference between, the white balance that was shot in and what I adjusted it to. So here's how it was shot, and here's what I adjusted it to. So now you've got like a very neutral white balance. As far as it being like too green or too magenta, it looks just right. And in fact, I might split the baby, so to speak, and warm it up just a tiny bit beyond neutral, just to keep that happy vibe. But here's as shot, and here's my final white balance. So I neutralized it and brought the temperature up just a tiny bit, because that's the feeling of the image. And here is before and after. And you can see this choice is still very neutral. Like, we're not stylizing the photo tremendously. We're just giving it again that beautiful micro contrast of film and that separation you get on film that makes it feel three-dimensional and organic and real. Whereas digital can be very flat, can be like super flat, and there's no grain, there's no, no real micro contrast or separation of the subject. Speaking of grain, I think that would look great on this image. I don't always add grain, it's kind of a hit or miss thing. But I'm going to zoom into 100%. I'm going to go down and I'm going to add 35 millimeter grain. So there's 35 millimeter grain, and this is without. Yeah, the medium format grain is a little too light for this. I want there to be grain, so that's perfect. And that is my final answer. So that grain just makes it. So without the grain, if you look down in here, you get, I don't know what to call it. I would call it like digital smoothing, where the, Lightroom, or not Lightroom, Capture One itself, or any program you're editing in, is going to try to reduce noise. And sometimes that can make the image look a little bit smeared, like an oil painting. And adding just a little bit of grain just snaps all that back and makes it feel real again. And I'm not talking like crazy amounts of grain. I'm zoomed in pretty tight here, but enough grain to make everything feel distinct. It actually feels like it has more detail even. So here's before and after. I'll zoom all the way back out. And that is just such a cool image. So thank you so much, Marcos, for that image. I love it. Okay. Find two more images here. Let's see. Let's do this one here. I really like this one. So it's by Radical Agape Productions. Thank you for submitting this image. It's really cool. One thing I really love about this image is that the photographer had the wherewithal to put the veil over the couple to act as like a diffuser in this lighting situation. So if you were a million years ago when I was in photography school, one exercise we did was to play with lighting modifiers outside. And one thing that you could do is you could put up these big silks over your subject to diffuse the light and make it much better for taking photos. And that is what's happening here with the veil. By putting the veil over them, we're diffusing the light and making it, much more even on their skin and on their faces. So great move, super good idea. And it's also kind of a cool framing device. So for this couple, I think I would go with probably Fuji 400H. I think that this image with a little bit of an exposure bump could land kind of somewhere in the middle of being like, dark or light. What makes an image dark or moody or light and airy isn't the exposure that it was shot at. That's really important to understand. It's the lighting situation, it's the wardrobe, it's the location. And thinking about those things, I think I'm going to try a Fuji 400H edit. So I applied Fuji 400H. It needs quite a big exposure bump, which is not a problem. And now I just need to do two other things. I'm going to warm it up just a little bit. There we go. Well, let me see. Right about to here. And now I'm going to add just a little bit of magenta. Just the tiniest bit. So right about there. Actually, I'm going to cool it down. Right about there. Okay, great. So I did my film style, I did my exposure adjustment, I did my white balance adjustments. One last thing I'm going to do, or maybe two last things, is I'm going to try to bring back the detail in this veil and also bring out a little bit of detail in these darker shadows down here in the corner using all soft. And this is a tone profile that I talked about earlier. So here is all soft. It's a very subtle adjustment. I'm going to roll over a few times so you can see. But watch the veil. It goes from being like kind of blown out up in here to having just a little bit of detail. And the same thing with the shadows. I'm also going to check to see if lens correction will help with this really dark area down here in the corner. Okay, it didn't really help with the dark area, but it did pull out some of the distortion in the lens. So we're going to go with that. Here is before and after. It's really amazing how much information and color and detail is in this photo just by increasing the exposure past this underexposure, original raw image. It looks good. I understand why it's underexposed. I think the photographer was trying to protect the highlights up here too. So if this photo had been exposed, correctly for the skin, I would imagine that there would be no detail left up here in the veil at all. So there was a decision made, a really good decision made at the time of taking it to go to underexpose a little bit, protect the highlights, and then bring everything back in Capture One. So very cool. Great job. All right. So do one last photo here. Got some food. Really a cool setting here that Nathan Smith put together. I love it. I think a well-organized and composed food photo can be really, really fun, and I love this one. Food is not, I'm going to just say it right now, food is not my forte for shooting, but I have found that depending on what you want to do with that image, like what kind of feeling you want to get from it, you can go with a lot of different packs. I would stay away from Portrait Original just because it's a little bit too dark and moody for something that you want to eat. Some people have great success with Portrait 160 in the right, the exact right situation for food, but I would stick with something either in Adventure Every Day or in Fuji Color Every Day. We have one photographer named Christina Quisenberry who does a lot of really amazing like food and lay flat photography, and she uses Gold 200 for a lot of it. So let's see how it looks on this one. So there's Gold 200. Gold 200 has kind of jade green shadows and then warmer midtones and highlights. It's a really interesting film. And you can see that jade green kind of up here in the branches. That will go away when I do steps 2 and 3. So I'm going to increase the exposure and then do a little temperature tint adjustment. So here's the second step. Increase the exposure just a little bit. And now I'm going to warm it up. There we go. Boom. Maybe a little too warm. I like to be right on the cusp of it being too cold or too warm. There's kind of like a neutral hang point that I want to get to. Right about there is good. Is this image magenta or green? Maybe a little bit green. So I'm going to go a little bit towards magenta. And even doing that, you're preserving that jade green in some of the darker neutrals and midtone, or darker neutrals and shadows. So like look at the knife. The knife is I love this color. It's kind of a gray that's on a little bit of the jade green side, and yet you have the warmth of the oranges, and it looks great. I love that contrast in color. So there's before and after. And one thing I'm going to do before I end this edit is I'm going to decrease the contrast just a little bit by using all soft. So that's kind of the nice little finishing touch. So all soft. And there you go. Before and after. Looks really, really good. So thank you, Nathan Smith, for sending this to me. Looks really good. So I hope you enjoyed this. It's been really, really fun. There's a lot of great photos that come into our community all the time. And if you want to see your photos in some of these editing videos, you got to be part of the community. And it doesn't matter if you already own anything that we make or not. We want to help you succeed. So go to Facebook, go to the Mastin Labs community on Facebook and join us. And when you get in, you're going to find lots of helpful information. We do 2 videos a week. There's so much good stuff. You can also drop in a raw file, and you'll have like 20 people edit it for you with any preset or film style that you want, so you can see what it looks like on your work. And that can be a really big deciding factor for people. They're like, yeah, I've seen it on the website. I don't believe it. Is it going to work for me? And that is the best way to find out. So come on in, put some photos in there, and ask for an edit, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. If you want to contact us directly, if you have like other questions, you can go to m.me/Mastin Labs, and you can slide right into our DMs directly, and we would love to help you. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss anything. And other than that, I just want to say, keep on editing, keep showing us good work in the community, and above all, happy editing and have a good day.